Hi, I'm Dr. Katie Berlin.
And I'm Dr. Alyssa Watson.
Thanks for joining us in the Veterinary Breakroom. These are shorter conversations where we chat informally about relevant topics that are affecting vet med today. And our special guest for this episode is another member of our medical team here at Instinct /Clinicians Brief /Plums, our Associate Pharmacy Officer, Dr. Erica Wassack. Dr. Erica, welcome. We're so excited you're here.
Oh, so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So today we're going to be talking, we have Erica here because we're going to be talking about something that I feel like is really important to have a pharmacist perspective on. And since Erica is a pharmacist, this is working out. So we have, a lot of contact with pharmacists sort of indirectly in veterinary medicine, whether we're compounding or sending out prescriptions or having somebody call them in for us. But there's also times when we have to talk directly to the pharmacist as veterinarians. And we haven't, I think, really spent a lot of time thinking about those relationships and how cultivating good relationships between veterinary teams and pharmacists can really benefit patients and clients as well as ourselves. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're very excited to have you here for that person on the other end of the phone or on the other side of the counter, because pharmacy interactions can be frustrating on both sides, but they're also super essential. So I think this is an important conversation. Erica, would you mind just telling the listeners just a nutshell version of your background so they know what kind of experience you've had?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm kind of one of those oddball pharmacists that I knew I wanted to do veterinary going into pharmacy school. Like every little kid, my dream was to be a veterinarian growing up. And I went into college and realized that I really connected with pharmacology and how the drugs work in the body. And that's because of my parents. They're both pharmacists. So I feel like I like my pharmacy roots run deep a little bit. And so I joined a panel in undergrad, and it had a pharmacist from the vet school. And at the time, I was going to NC State for undergrad. And the pharmacist was the director of pharmacy at the vet school. And she was talking a little bit about what she does on a day-to-day. And I was like, yes, 100%. That's what I want to do with my life. So I went to pharmacy school, suffered through all the human stuff, and then specialized in veterinary pharmacology. So I did a residency at NC State in veterinary pharmacy. And then when I graduated, I got my diplomat status. So I'm a board certified veterinary pharmacist. I spent some time at amazing veterinary teaching hospitals. And then I most recently was the pharmacy director at Mississippi State's College of Veterinary Medicine for 5 years before I joined Instinct. And so I'm really excited to be part of the Instinct team because education has been my biggest passion. And what I do at Instinct with the drug interaction checker and drug monographs is basically spreading that knowledge to every single person I can and sharing that information with future veterinarians, future pharmacists, and all the colleagues in between. Is just my bread and butter.
So, Erica, I think that's fascinating, especially because I think a lot of veterinarians can relate to that. Just like you said, a lot of us have really wanted to follow this career path since we were, young children. I have heard from other pharmacists even on our team, that specializing, in veterinary pharmacology is a bit of a journey, and sometimes you have to kind of make it up as you go because those opportunities weren't really available. Do you find that that's changing right now? And is there a way that we as veterinarians can find pharmacists that have specific interest in veterinary medicine?
Yes, we're actually at a really exciting time in the veterinary pharmacy world because veterinary pharmacy is actually starting to get recognized in the pharmacy field. So some wonderful people, way smarter than me, are basically the advocates for veterinary pharmacies. So the American Pharmacists Association just recognized veterinary pharmacy. And what's really cool is that they changed the definition of patient just recently from humans to include all species, which is fabulous. And now what's really exciting is that the Board of Pharmacy Specialties is looking into making veterinary pharmacy a specialty and a board specialty, which is really, really cool. Most people don't realize that I'm one of maybe 50 in the world that are diplomats in veterinary pharmacy. And so when you go to pharmacy school, you learn the human stuff, and most pharmacy students, they're exposure to veterinary pharmacy is usually through an elective, and it's usually through an elective course if their pharmacy school offers it. But now more and more schools are starting to offer that course, and now they're also getting students to do a rotation in their clinical year in a veterinary pharmacy setting. And that could be at a veterinary teaching hospital like Mississippi State. It could be at a compounding pharmacy that does a lot of veterinary compounding drugs, or it could be an independent pharmacy that does a lot of veterinary prescriptions. And so it's getting a whole lot more. So I feel like we're in a really cool time where the exposure to veterinary is getting basically like exponential growth, and the opportunities for students and for pharmacists to learn about veterinary pharmacology is expanding, which is great.
That's amazing. And on the one hand, you're like, wow, it's only just feels like it's only just catching on. And,
Mm-hmm.
pets have been taking drugs for a long time. On the other hand, our business models are changing. Like
Mm-hmm.
I know now it was unusual when I graduated in 2009 to script things out. Like I was prescribing a lot of things that we dispensed in the clinic. And so having a pharmacist involved who wasn't a compounding pharmacy was actually relatively rare unless I was doing something really simple like cephalexin because we were out or because the client could get it for $4 or something like that. But for the most part, we kept things on our shelves. And now I'm working in a practice that hardly keeps anything on the shelf. And it's definitely moving that way as more and more, online pharmacies and clients are price savvy and want to shop around. I feel like it's a lot more common that we have these interactions together. So I guess it makes sense that pharmacists who have up till now really been focused on human pharmacy, they now are realizing there's a much greater need. And I think that's where some of the friction has been, right? Is like our needs have been growing, which has sort of perpetuated this change that we're starting to see in the pharmacy industry. But it's, as most things do, coming because of demand and need, which started first. So we've been hitting these sort of friction points of like vet teams calling in medications to pharmacy and there being sort of a lapse in communication between the vet team member and on the way to the pharmacy or pharmacy tech and then to the client. There can be miscommunications or things that just could go more smoothly. And that's one of the things I really want to address because I feel like we've sort of developed this us versus them mentality of like, oh, this is so annoying. Like the pharmacist is asking me questions they shouldn't be asking me. Like no one's doing anything to make somebody else have a bad day. So just right off the bat, I'm interested in knowing like what you think some of the things that we could do as veterinary professionals are to smooth out those interactions and kind of get ahead of them.
Yeah, that's a great question. I can always tell you all the stories even I've dealt with community pharmacists and not understanding veterinary prescriptions. I do have one fun story I can probably tell you later, but
Yeah, we like
um,
stories.
oh, I love stories. But I think the biggest thing is, traditionally pharmacists aren't educated in veterinary, so they have to seek out those resources. What's great now is that a lot of boards of pharmacy are requiring, if you dispense a veterinary prescription, to have a veterinary resource on hand. So, like North Carolina, for example, is one of those states that if a pharmacy dispenses a veterinary drug, they have to have some resource. Traditionally it's Plum's veterinary drugs because that's the most common one that most pharmacists can recognize. So that's getting more. But what people don't realize is that pharmacist has what's called a corresponding liability when we dispense a prescription. And basically what that means is that we're held liable if a prescription is dispensed to ensure that that prescription is correct, that it's not going to cause patient harm, that whatever medication is not going to interfere with any other medication that patient's on, whether it's a human or non-human. And so what my job is to make sure that when I look at that prescription, is it legitimate? One, is it a valid prescription that the provider has written, and making sure I can actually read what sometimes is written, because some handwritings can be very interesting. Thank God for electronic prescribing nowadays. And then if it's for a veterinary patient, traditionally, since we don't have that knowledge and background, is trying to figure out like, what is that medication for? Are we using it for like what we know it for? Like hydrocodone, for example, is a perfect one. Like we use it hydrocodone for pain in humans, but in veterinary, especially in dogs, we can use it for chronic cough with heart failure, right? So understanding what we use that purpose of that medication for. And then what's even more on that layer is to basically, is that medication dose the same? And I love to use levothyroxine as my like go-to drug, right? Because in humans, the half-life of it is so long. It's a week half-life in humans, but in dogs is 12 hours. So we're dosing it twice a day in dogs, but in humans once a day, like it can build up. So the idea of a really hefty dose twice a day in a dog, like throws pharmacists completely out of whack because they just don't understand that the PK differences between the dogs and the humans. And so that's probably the one I love to talk about because that's the one that usually you see a lot with that caveat between veterinarians and pharmacists. But understanding like also like the rigorous pharmacies, like we fill like 200 plus prescriptions a day too. So in addition to that, the phone's going off, patients are at the door, all of this stuff. And so that communication between the veterinarian and the pharmacist is just so important. And I love that communication because at the end of the day, it's about our patients and making sure our patients are safe when they're getting those medications.
So, from your standpoint, is it helpful for us veterinarians to put indications like directly in our script? You know, I'm prescribing this gabapentin 3 times a day for anxiety or, you know, for something. Is that helpful?
Actually, yes, I would love that. The more information a pharmacist can have, especially in a patient that they're not familiar with or species they're not familiar with, the better. Because sometimes we use some indications very differently in vet med than we do in human medicine. So to knowing what it's for is actually extremely helpful. Like especially like the hydrocodone, we're using it for cough and for chronic cough. Like most pharmacists don't know that because they only see it as a short-term pain management option for humans. So to have that is so helpful.
And then I have another question about like just a pharmacist's autonomy in changing prescriptions or substituting or altering prescriptions because there's a lot of laws around
Mhm.
those, you know, specific to humans. And I think that there is a misunderstanding with veterinarians about what pharmacists are allowed to do.
Yeah, so we can change a prescription, but up to a certain amount. So I can't like completely change from gabapentin to pregabalin or anything. But like say if you prescribe a good example is trazodone is probably a great one. It comes as a 50 milligram tablet or a 100 milligram tablet. Like say if the pharmacy only carries 50 milligrams, but you prescribe 100 milligram strength, like one tablet twice a day, I can change it to a 50 milligram 2 tablets twice a day to dispense what I have on my shelf. But I can't completely change trazodone to fluoxetine or anything like that. That's completely out of my scope. But I can change strengths if needed. I can also change from capsules to tablets. If you put in a capsule, but all I have is tablets, I could potentially change that as well. As long as it's not completely changing the way the drug works, if that makes sense. But I do have that basically freedom a little bit, but it's a very short stretch of freedom.
So, if we don't want that to be done, like if we know that a pharmacy could have only tablets when we've asked for capsules, like
Mhm.
say this isn't something I typically do, it's probably not generally recommended, but say we wanted to open a capsule and like
Mhm.
pour the contents into food,
Yeah, that's a great one.
then
I'll
um,
readily say I do that all the
yeah.
time.
I mean, I just haven't had a
I'm
lot
like,
of
open
luck
the
with it.
capsule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like, this is something that I've done, with before. And if somebody sent home tablets instead, I'd be kind of annoyed because then those
Mhm.
instructions don't work anymore. And is there a way that we can say no substitutions? Like, can we write that on the script?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's actually in the law that says if a veterinarian writes dispense as written or DAW, we can only dispense what you ask for. So, like a good example would be like a brand name product versus generic. I like to
Mhm.
do carprofen as a great example. Like if you put in your prescription Rimadyl and you didn't put dispense as written, I could potentially change it to the generic or excuse us, I take that back. So say you have carprofen and all I have is Rimadyl. I can use Rimadyl. But if you write Rimadyl on your prescription and say dispense is written, I can only provide you Rimadyl. I can't do any other brand out there. Does that make sense a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
And that means also like if we don't put dispense as written and we put Rimadyl and you have generic carprofen, you do have the ability to say to the client, like, we do have a generic.
I can call you and ask to say, hey, all I have is a different brand, or I have this, and see if you're okay with it. Because you put Rimadyl on that prescription, I have to dispense Rimadyl. But if you write carprofen, for example, I can dispense Rimadyl. I can dispense Carprovet or Vetprofen or any whatever brand there is on there. But you
Okay.
have to put DAW when you want that specific brand in there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Does
Um,
that make sense?
so, well, so if we don't put DAW or dispense as written
Mm-hmm.
and we write Rimadyl
Mm-hmm.
and you have both Rimadyl and generic carprofen on the shelf, do you
Mm-hmm.
have the ability, since I didn't put dispense as written, to ask the client which they would prefer? Or do you, as the
If you write
pharmacist, make that
carprofen on
decision?
that script, so like if you write the generic carprofen on that script and you
So
have
if we
Rimadyl, yeah.
so if we write the brand name but
Mm-hmm.
don't write dispense as written, you still would have to call us first.
I would do
Just
Rimadyl unless there's the cheaper option. I would call you and say, "Hey,
okay.
Rimadyl can be kind of expensive.
Yeah.
Can we use the generic carprofen and make it a little bit cheaper for the client?"
I
So,
was really curious about that because I feel like, one of our goals is not to have the client leave the pharmacy more confused than when they went
mm-hmm.
in.
Oh
And I
yeah.
do feel, and sometimes I think pharmacists or pharmacy techs might take it upon themselves to give the client information, which could be accurate, but not necessarily applicable to that patient,
Mm-hmm.
where we might have tried a generic carprofen and it didn't work as well, or
Yep.
for that particular patient, it caused stomach upset or something like that, and we are more familiar with that information than the client was, then I feel like the client could suddenly feel like they're being given an option they weren't given at our office, which then I think is one of those friction points.
Yeah. Yeah, my favorite is I don't know if you've ever seen like Diltiazem XR at all. But the Diltiazem XR comes as a capsule, and depending on the brand, it could be tablets inside that capsule, it could be granules, it could be beads. It's so many different options. And so a lot of cardiologists will say, get the Diltiazem XR capsule and then take an inner tablet outside of that capsule and give it to the patient. But if you just write Diltiazem XR capsule, like the pharmacy can choose any of those brands. But if you wanted that specific brand with the tablet inside of it, you have to say, hey, I want Diltiazem XR capsule tablet inside, or it's like Mylan brand is the brand that it comes in. And you have to say dispense this brand. And then that way the pharmacist understands. But that one's a fun one. When you're like, you
Yeah,
shake it, like you shake the capsule and you're like, what's inside of this one?
it's like a little gift.
Yep.
That's really cool, and I'm getting the impression that, like, generally speaking, to improve communication, more information right in the script is better.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
If you've noticed your dog having difficulty moving, jumping, or playing, it could be a sign of osteoarthritis pain, or OA pain. OA pain is a chronic condition that impacts how your dog moves and feels. Do you think your dog is showing signs of OA pain? Know that treatment options are available. Ask your vet about what they can do to help control your dog's OA pain. Tap Learn More for details.
Another thing I'm curious about, Erica, is the different staff roles,
Mhm.
at the pharmacy, and specifically retail pharmacists, where we would be calling in prescriptions, because whenever you're talking about communication, I always feel like more direct is better, and the more people it goes through, the more potential there is for a
Right.
communication breakdown. And so sometimes we're handing this script off to our licensed technicians, or even one of our receptionists or client care representatives, and they're calling in, and they're not potentially not talking directly to the pharmacist. So what are the staff at the pharmacy, and how do they help support you so that you can do your job as the pharmacist?
So what's fun to get into law a little bit is every state is different. And I hate to say that, but like certain states only allow like pharmacists to take in a prescription. Some states allow a technician too. So it depends on your state laws with the Board of Pharmacy on who you can talk to for that prescription to go in. So like as a generic, you have your pharmacist. So usually it's one or two pharmacists on staff, depending on the volume of that pharmacy retail store. You'll have like between 2 technicians all the way up to like 3 to 4, depending on the ratio your board of pharmacy allows. And then you may or may not have like a cashier that can help, but they can only touch the cashier machine. Like they are not allowed to touch anything in the pharmacy. So it depends on the state laws associated with that. So sometimes you can ask directly for the pharmacist and not the technician, but it depends on the state. So it's hard to say a direct, oh, this person has this role, and then goes from there. But it really does depend on the state law.
I mean, it's no different than our vet teams, really.
Exactly.
We have, so much variation. And, it seems like in my last few interactions in an in-person pharmacy, because I normally get my own prescriptions and most of my pet prescriptions by mail. But when I had to go the other week, it was because I had the flu and I needed to pick up Tamiflu. And I was like, when you're picking up Tamiflu and you live alone, like you go to the pharmacy and you're at death's door, it feels like, I'm like swaying on my feet. And of course, like it wasn't ready, hours later. And the Walgreens that I go to they've never made a mistake. They're always very shorthanded. And it is absolutely not their fault that it takes forever to get things filled. But like, I felt so much empathy for them, but also I was like contagious and like dead on my feet standing in the pharmacy. And it was one of those moments where I'm like, I am not my best self right now. And the pharmacist was doing what he could. And the tech was like on the phone here in the drive-through here, and then like trying to tell me that she would be right with me. But she was getting pretty miffed because I was just kind of like hanging out. Like I couldn't shop. I was very sick. And I just, in those moments, I feel like it helped me a little bit knowing you, because I was like, I know pharmacists now. Like I work with 3 pharmacists and they're great people. Like I realize this is a really, really hard job, but also, when you are in a situation where they're short-staffed, just like we are, the client is waiting with a sick pet potentially in the car. They're freaking out. We don't have a way to guarantee back at the vet office when prescriptions will be ready. There's so many friction points there. And I was just wondering, like on the client side, so say I'm in the room with a client, I'm like, we're going to have the team call in this script for you so that it gets in as soon as possible. Is there a way that we can help set those interactions up for success, knowing that there's a very good chance the pharmacy is going to be overwhelmed just like we are?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I'll admit I will never do retail if I can.
It looks so hard.
The pharmacists that do that, like I give them so much props, because I've done it as a student, and I told myself like, yep, that's not me. And what's interesting, is the work environment right now is changing with pharmacy. Like there's a lot of mandates right now. What people don't realize too is that when we're short staffed, 100%, and it's always the pharmacist. We're having to talk to insurance and prior authorizations and all that fun stuff. And lunch breaks, like we get a 30-minute lunch break supposedly, but if you ever notice, like when the gates close in the pharmacy, like they're behind there like catching up because there's so much. So like the pharmacist actually doesn't get a break. And historically, like what a lot of particularly chain pharmacies have done is saying like, if you have a stool in the pharmacy, like you're not supposed to be sitting. Like pharmacists have to like stand, and then to have coverage and all that stuff. But it's just telling a client basically, it depends on how that prescription is also given to that pharmacy, right? So is it electronic prescription? Are you faxing it to that pharmacy? Are you handing a paper prescription to that client? Because if you hand the paper prescription, then they go to the pharmacy, it's going to be like a 15-minute wait minimum if they're lucky. Or they would, if it's a good pharmacist to be like, okay, I have your prescription. It's going to be a little while. Come back in a few hours and I might have it ready. Another great one is if you hand the prescription to them, or you can call it straight to the pharmacy and talk to the pharmacist and tell the client, hey, I'll call this pharmacy for you. What pharmacy would you like me to send this prescription to? Call the pharmacist and say, yep, here it is. And then ask the pharmacist while you're on the phone, if they can answer, and say, hey, what time frame should I tell the client? And pharmacists will love you for that, because you can be like, I can't do it today, but it'll be ready first thing tomorrow morning. And then telling the client, is it a medication that can kind of wait a little bit, or is it an emergency prescription? You can tell the pharmacist that too. It's like, hey, I need this for this client. Is there any way you can help me out? And pharmacists are more willing when you kind of add a little bit of sugar to something rather than vinegar.
As are we all, right? Like when people
Yeah.
are nice, it makes us want to do nice things for them. So
yeah, but having that
is
expectation too is important.
yeah, that's super
I run
helpful.
into that quite frequently. Actually, I do part-time in-home hospice and end-of-life care. And so oftentimes I am calling in. There are a lot of situations where I'll go do a quality of life exam and we decide that, euthanasia is the best course, but they want a little more time. They've got family that's coming in or something like that. And in those instances, what's so important is getting a medication that can help palliate that animal, but also getting just a few days, quickly. And where I run into issues is not knowing. I never know what a pharmacy is going to have, in stock. And, I'll call and I don't want to leave a message, because if they don't have what I need, or we need to, make a different plan or something like that, I'm not easy to get a hold of. They can't just call me back because sometimes I'm with another client or something like that. And so from that standpoint, I always feel like I'm being a burden because I'm making them pick up the phone, and I know they're so busy, but I'm really trying to stave off some of those other, questions or frustrations that might come in, because I know that it's hard to get a hold of me back.
Yeah. I think what would be the most revolutionary thing is electronic prescribing in veterinary medicine. And I know
Wouldn't it?
to have because that's the most common way that, human medication, 90% of the medications are done today in pharmacies. And so veterinarians are kind of the oddball out, because you do paper, or you have to call it in, or you fax it in. And that's all old school methods compared to electronic prescribing. But whenever that happens, that's going to be a huge game changer to veterinarians. And I think that would probably be the best thing to help with speed things along too.
Yeah, I
I
agree.
get that
And
100%.
I have to think that once that happens, a lot of this conversation is hopefully going to be obsolete because there will be so many fewer barriers between the exam room and that patient having the prescription. But it is still hard, and I also think about what happens when there's a mistake at either end. So
Oh, yes.
I was working with an associate who is a great vet, like a super thorough veterinarian, very careful. And she was calling in a prescription for azithromycin for a cat, and azathioprine was dispensed.
Oh, no.
And that was not a good substitution at all. Like, that was not a good mistake. And the cat, I believe, did not survive. And we're not, to this day, I think, not sure where the mistake happened. Did it happen because somebody said the wrong name on the phone? Did it happen because the pharmacy tech or pharmacist took it wrong? Did it happen between that call and filling the prescription? We don't know. And it's really hard to know, quote unquote, who to blame. And because the client's always going to want to know, who did this. And we're always going to feel some level of responsibility, but it also makes it hard to troubleshoot. So I'm wondering, in situations like that, how do we communicate effectively with the pharmacy without it being the blame game?
Yeah. And, what's interesting is that I can actually speak from experience on that, because I have made mistakes before. And mine was as a student, and this is not like a veterinary prescription, but was a human prescription. We had a patient with the same name. It was like Jane Smith. Both of their birthdays were 1/1/65 and then 1/10/65. It was crazy. And they were both on the same it was like the perfect Swiss cheese model for a mistake. And it was my mistake as a student. Again, I was learning, but it got to the point where the the patient was picking up the prescription, and we were trying to figure out like why the system wasn't taking her birthday. And then we found out it was because it was the wrong patient that we dispensed it for. And it's just, it was like the perfect analogy of like getting there wrong and making that mistake. But in those situations, when as a pharmacist, like I take mistakes like very personal, because I have done that before. I actually have dispensed the wrong medication. I accidentally did one where, and this was in a hospital setting, not a retail setting, but I dispensed methadone instead of meropitant. And it was just like one of those, like we were very busy, both vials right there, drawing it up. And the dosing is, 1 mg per kg of meropitant, but methadone is 0.1 mg per kg. And I was drawing up the meropitant dose into the methadone. And it was like, 10 times difference. And I just remember running down that hall, like catching that technician and being like, don't dispense this, like, no, type of deal. And so having that communication, trying to figure out what can we do to make that not make that mistake again. And so in that like retail setting, it's like, okay, azithromycin, azathioprine, like that's a lookalike, sound-alike medication. Should we do the brand name, but say dispense generic in that situation? Confirming with the pharmacist if that was a phone call situation, hey, repeat this back to me. Azithromycin, what strength is it? That type of deal. And on the pharmacist end, like to me, I always double check with the veterinarian I'm on the phone with, saying, okay, like just to double check, and azithromycin, whatever. And so acknowledging that mistake, one, but say like, what can I do better to make sure this doesn't happen again for that veterinarian, or what can I do to prevent that in the future? So maybe it's not a leave a message situation. It's I need to speak to that pharmacist and take that extra time on the phone to ensure that happens. But yeah, mistakes happen. But what we can do as healthcare professionals is try to figure out together what we can do to prevent that from the future.
Do pharmacists get communication training? Like, is that something that's part of your education or continuing education?
Yes. So a lot of it is most geared towards counseling human patients. We actually are still required by law to counsel on any prescription, whether it's human or non-human, depending on your state. But yeah, communication training is one big thing. A CE is a great one that we do. Pharmacy school, I remember like how to talk to a doctor and figure out what can we do in those situations. But most of mine is like on the hospital setting rather than the retail side of like calculations, dosages, things like that. But yeah, it's kind of say like, hey, what's up, doc? Like, what can I do for you? Like that type of deal.
I actually had a local pharmacist in the town where I used to work who I called in so many prescriptions. They would compound for us. So it was like our local compounder, but they were also just like a family pharmacy, like little apothecary. And the pharmacist there, his name was John, and he would be like, oh, hey, doc, every time I called in, to get little metronidazole or whatever. Like, hey, doc, what can I get for you today? Yeah. And it was so fun. I actually really liked calling. And there is definitely something to be said for building those relationships where you kind of start to get to know what the other person wants and needs on both ends.
Yeah, compounding is a whole different ballgame too.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, that's an extra layer to that.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is a whole nother podcast, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because the law is changing so much too with compounding, which is crazy. And then like most veterinarians don't realize, like veterinarians can compound. You guys can legally compound. It's just making sure that your facility is set up to follow all the regulations for it, which most vets don't know that. I love telling my students that y'all can make it too.
I mean, technically when I take a bottle of Triz Ultra ear cleaner and then put like enrofloxacin injectable in it, I'm compounding, right?
You are.
It's just for that one patient. Yep. Like, here you go. I've just made this for you.
Yep. It's like the definition is so different depending on like the organization. Like FDA has a different definition. USP has a different definition. Even your state boards have a different definition of what compounding is, but it's basically like changing any ingredient than the intended use of it. So yeah, mixing two drugs together, adding a flavor, making like crushing a sucralfate and given as a slurry is technically compounding. So it's kind of cool how all that goes. But yeah, you're right. Totally different podcast.
I feel like we need a follow-up on that or a daily rounds on that because
it's like chocolate cake, right? So like everyone has a chocolate cake recipe, and I love to
that's right. Yeah,
that's my favorite with students. It's like it's chocolate cake. What you talking about?
Yeah. Well, this has been really helpful. Like, I think, even if every situation is different, every veterinary team and pharmacy interaction is different, just like every patient client interaction is different. So knowing that we need to tailor our expectations based on the situation, how urgent things are, how short-staffed our local pharmacy is, how many options the clients have. I do feel like even just acknowledging that we need to just give a little extra airtime to these conversations and relationships is super important, because it's not going to be like eventually there's no human involved anywhere, at least not for a very long time. So we really need to remember that there's a human on the other end of the line. There is one more question that I have.
Yeah,
Alyssa, I don't
absolutely.
know if you have any more questions for Erica, but my big question is, so I still see conversations online where veterinarians are extraordinarily like over the top frustrated because they keep getting asked for their prescriber number, their NPI number. And veterinarians do not get NPI numbers. And I feel like at this point, it seems like pharmacies should know that. But I have gotten asked not too long ago, and I'm just wondering if you can comment on that so that people listening can be like, I get it now.
Yeah. So you're actually not taught that in pharmacy school at all. Like you're
Yeah,
taught,
that's crazy to me.
pharmacology.
Crazy.
But yeah, so NPI is the National Provider Identification Number. And in that law, it specifically says something, from my knowledge, human. Like it actually has the word human in there. So veterinarians are automatically excluded. But unless you look for that law and like know exactly what it says, like it's just one of those things that every doctor, human doctor, has to have one when they graduate. So the way the system is set up in a lot of retails, especially big chain pharmacies, is that that's the first thing that will automatically be put for that clinician, and then the DEA. And so with veterinarians, unfortunately, a lot of the big chain pharmacy systems are not set up the way for success for veterinarians, because you would have to actually input the veterinarian's license number instead of that NPI number. And it's just like any computer system, right? Like you probably weren't taught a computer system in vet school. You were taught all the disease states and how to treat that and everything. And then you learn on your job that computer system and how it works. So it's the same thing with pharmacists. Like we're taught these things, but that's one of the ones that are not taught, because it's like 10% maybe of prescriptions. Maybe I'm going over when I say 10%, maybe 5% of prescriptions are veterinary prescriptions. And so it's just the way the system works. And so my biggest thing for veterinarians is, one, don't ever give your DEA out if it's for a non-controlled. The DEA actually discourages clinicians from sending someone their DEA just because they can't find an NPI number. And so what's funny is that when I was a resident, I actually had a how-to for CVS on how to input a veterinarian in their system without an NPI number. And it's crazy, like taking screenshots of that thing. Like that was one of my projects, is to show them, hey, how do you get around the system? Yeah, so it's just one of those. And then if the pharmacist actually is like, I don't want to say seasoned, but if they know their system very well, they can easily like figure that out. It's just a few extra steps. But it's also like a pain in the butt for the pharmacist too, to input that information. But like the pharmacist needs to realize like you have to do that. Like that's not something that you can ask for the DEA, because veterinarians don't want to give their DEA out
Right, for
on a prescription
self-election.
unless they absolutely have to. So
Yeah.
it's a two-way street on that. But yeah, I actually had to deal with that, calling in stuff for veterinarians before and talking to the pharmacists. And what's funny is when I talked to a CVS, I literally pull that sheet up and be like, all right, here's how you do it. Bam, 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 bam. So
I feel like we need that sheet. We need to like put that sheet somewhere in
I
every
would love
clinic.
a copy of that sheet.
Yes.
Yeah, but it was a project as a resident. And that's straight for CVS. I don't know if like Rite Aid or Walgreens had that particular setup, but yeah, it was one of those. Don't tell them I did that as an intern too. I had an insider of CVS give me the screenshots.
That's amazing. And it should be done. It shouldn't have to be an inside, like backdoor operation to do that. It should just be part of the training at this point. So hopefully we'll get there soon. If it is becoming more and more common.
Yeah, and it's crazy because I mean I have stories too, but I remember this one client calling us up, and it was about hydrocodone. She was really upset because a pharmacy wouldn't fill that prescription, and so I called the pharmacy up for the doctor just to kind of see like what's going on. And the pharmacist there said that the dog was under the age of 18 and is contraindicated in patients under the age of 18, which is humans, right? Like,
Right. I
and
mean,
so
where's the
I
lie,
remember this,
right?
like I was a baby pharmacist, right? I just finished residency, had my very first big girl job. And I just was like, it's a dog. Like, you know that, right? And so the pharmacist like, yeah, but it's under the age of 18. I was like, okay, it's 14 as a dog. So in dog years, is that like 80 something years old? Like, would that work for you? And he goes, no. And I was like, okay, great. The owner is 45. Like, can you put the owner in there? Like, what's going on? And I just remember getting so frustrated and like being on that end of the veterinarian and understanding like the frustration along with it. I remember being a little petty at that time though. I remember just being like, okay, that's fine. Calling the owner up and say, hey, don't ever go to this pharmacy, go to this one that's more pet friendly. And I gave her a couple options that was in the area. And then I remember calling corporate and calling to the district manager and like went straight to the top and be like, okay, CE right now, like you can
I don't think that's
give
petty.
this
It's
medication to a
important.
dog.
Yeah, it's important. And it undermines veterinarians' credibility when the pharmacist won't follow our instructions, you know?
Yeah.
So if the pharmacist says, I can't do what the vet said, the client's not going to be like, hey, pharmacist, you don't know. They're going to be like, oh, the doctor gave a prescription to this pharmacy that can't be filled. And that's going to come back to us. So definitely all in the name of interdepartmental communication, I
Oh
think.
yes. And
It's good.
it's hard too because like it's that fine line, right? Because like I can understand why that pharmacist may have questioned that prescription because it's hydrocodone. It's one of those that we're getting a whole lot of pressure of not filling medication because of people using it inappropriately, right?
Yeah.
Like and they're abusing it. So you're getting a lot of pressure because there's a lot of lawsuits right now of pharmacies and pharmacists getting basically sued and getting a lot of jail time because of what they've done in the past of the opioid crisis. And so like, I feel like a lot of pharmacists are like getting that kind of caveat, like, okay, is this for hydrocodone? Is this owner using it? Because it was it was a lot of hydrocodone tablets for that owner. And so like, that's a red flag for a lot of pharmacists when they are not familiar with that. And so it's just one of those, like, I can understand where the pharmacist is coming from, but at the exact same time, like that communication, be like, hey, like this is what it's for. But yeah, so that's just one of those situations. And I always tell vet students when I was taught is like, just give them a little bit of grace too, because you don't know what's going on behind that phone. Like they could have had the worst day ever. Like a client or a patient was yelling at them or something happened. Because growing up with pharmacy stories, my parents being pharmacists, like I have that understanding. But yeah, also the frustration of that veterinarian too.
Yeah. Give them grace. That's a good rule of thumb in general.
And same for pharmacists. Like you have to give the veterinarians grace too. Like you don't know, they could have just, euthanized a patient that has been their patient for years, and then they're calling you for a prescription, and then it goes both ways to give grace.
Definitely.
Yeah. And I think also remembering that at the end of the day, we're a team, and both professionals on each end have their own ethical standard that they have to uphold, and they have their own license and their own livelihood attached to that prescription. So we're not, it's not one-sided.
Yep.
And retail, I give them so many props. And even like when you get into hospital veterinary pharmacy, like that's even more fun. So,
well, thanks, Erica, for sharing a lot of that experience and shedding some light on these things and just kind of giving us a good reminder of what's going on the other end, as well as some of the things that can and can't be done, because I think that's something most of us just have no idea, So it's time for Win of the Week. Let's end on a high note. Alyssa, would you like to start us off?
Sure, I would love to. I have a wonderful win. I mentioned, my in-home hospice and euthanasia practice. We this practice, my boss started about 7 years ago. And a few years ago, we had another associate. There were 3 of us, and she ended up moving back to the Midwest to be closer to family. And I miss her every single day. She's one of my closest friends. We still talk every night after our shift. But for a little over a year, then it was just down to just my boss and myself. And we provide care 7 days a week. And we hired another associate. And so I'm so excited because that gives us more flexibility and the ability to help more families. And I'm thrilled to have another associate on our team.
That's awesome. And Erica, what about you?
Well, my win hasn't happened yet, but on Saturday, the AKC is doing a diving contest at Mississippi State, and they're doing it with Nutramax. So my family and I are going to be attending the AKC diving competition on campus, and I'm really excited for it.
That's fun. I can't imagine a diving competition because I'm in Colorado and it would be freezing. But that's very, very cool. Well, I hope that goes great and you have a good time.
What about you, Dr. Berlin? Do you have anything to tell us about?
Yes, my win. So you and I had a conversation, Alyssa, a few months ago about, actually it could have been a year ago now, it's a while ago. We talked about AI scribe software because we both had experiences with it. And at the time had not found it to be maybe a game changer for us at that moment, for various reasons. You know, it wasn't really the software, it was more just like how it fit into what we were doing and what we had found it capable of at that point. And I had not purchased anything. I'd just done a couple of trials. But I did another trial recently because my relief shifts now are generally at the same clinic. And I felt like maybe I should give it another try now that I know what practice management software I'm going to be working with and what the kind of general workflow is like. And so I tried another one, and they were great getting me set up, and the demo was really good. And I find the software really intuitive. And I did my first shift with it on Friday, and we were booked. And I was at lunch 2 minutes after the lunch break started. And I left 10 minutes after my last appointment was scheduled to end. And I don't think that's ever happened to me. So I just have to say, and it was kind of fun, you know, like I don't think that this software was necessarily better than what I had been using, although I do think the transcription was a lot more accurate than the one I had used. And it might just be like, that could just be a variation in how I was using it, or the setup of the hospital. But it was super fun to actually see it in work and find on the very first day that it could save me so much time. So I don't think I'm ever going to practice without it again, honestly. I'm hooked, and not dreading that like stack, you know, virtual stack of records by the end of the day. It made me really, really happy. So that is my win. And I think it's a big one.
I am so glad you found one that, you know, fit your style. That was one of the things we had talked about, you know, that sometimes going back and reading them, it was, you know, like someone else had written this or it wasn't really your record. And so I'm glad that you found one that you really feel like embodies your voice and can, you know, accurately describe what you're doing.
That's the hardest thing, right? We send discharge statements home with every client. We email them a discharge after every appointment, even if it's just a little one. And it just wrote them for me. And I barely had to change anything. I mean, and that's like just a miracle. Magic. As far as I'm concerned. Yes. And I know people are going to be like, what software did she use? And I do not want to name it on the air because I don't want to make it seem like Clinician's Brief is endorsing this software. Like, it's not a relationship. I just picked this one because of a friend that works there, and I really love it. But it is great, and I'm sure that a lot of them are doing really amazing things now. So check it out if you've been resistant like me. Check it out because I think it actually is just a total game changer. So
that's so cool.
Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us in the break room, Dr. Erica. This has been fantastic. We really appreciate your perspective and your time, and I know we're going to be seeing you again on the podcast. There's absolutely no doubt. And also we'll find you on daily rounds sometimes too. So
yes, definitely.
And thanks to all of you for listening. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks for joining us in the Veterinary Break Room. If you enjoyed today's episode, you can find us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, including a video version on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you subscribe, rate, and review us. You can also listen to or watch our podcast episodes on our website at cliniciansbrief.com/podcasts, or drop us a line at podcasts@vetmedics.com. Veterinary Breakroom is a Vetmedics production produced by Alexis Ussery and co-hosted by me, Dr. Alyssa Watson, and Dr. Beth Mollison.